MGM spent millions creating The Wizard of Oz, but they also spent decades hiding the truth. The studio hired 11 writers but only credited 3. They fired directors and destroyed footage to cover their mistakes. The Munchkin actors were paid less than the dog and faced terrible working conditions. One actor's voice remains in the movie even though he was replaced and nearly died. But the most shocking secret, the studio covered it all up and fans still don't know the full truth about what really happened. When L. Rank Ball published The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in 1900, he had no idea what he had started. The title itself came from a file cabinet in his office labeled A to G, H to N and O to Z. The book sold out its first 10,000 copies in just 8 months. By 1956, over 3 million copies were sold. Didn't take long before it was called America's favorite homegrown fairy tale. And that was before the movies or musical. Just 2 years after the book came out, a Broadway version pulled in huge crowds. The magic of Dorothy and Toto had already taken hold. Everything changed again in 1937 when Disney's Snow White stunned the world. It wasn't just a hit. It made over $8 million in the US alone. MGM took notice. Arthur Freed believed The Wizard of Oz could become a musical that might even outdo Disney's success. He also needed something big for Judy Garland. MGM paid a record $75,000 for the rights in early 1938. For other studios were trying to get it too. Fantasy films were still risky, but MGM didn't want to be left behind. With Disney dominating animation, MGM wanted to rule live fantasy. But the first version of Oz MGM planned wasn't full of wonder. They told a young assistant named William H. Cannon to remove the magic. At the time, fantasy films rarely worked, so they tried to make us feel realistic. In his draft, the Tin Man was a criminal trapped forever in a metal suit. The Scarecrow was just a fool, stuck scaring birds because he couldn't do anything else. Dorothy wasn't even the main character. The Cowardly Lion was a cursed prince who fought dragons. Aunt Em was cruel. It was dark, sad, and far from the joyful world people loved in the book. Eventually, MGM changed course. They brought the magic back and started over. Getting a final script was just as messy. MGM secretly hired several writers to work on it at the same time. Each one had their own vision. Some wanted more music. Others wanted more realism or more fantasy. One version barely included Dorothy at all. At least 11 writers worked on it. William H. Cannon started it. Then came poet Ogden Nash. Screenwriters like Noel Langley, Florence Ryerson, and Herman Mankiewicz. Even Arthur Freed, the producer, wrote pages. They didn't always know what the others were doing. In the end, only Langley, Ryerson, and Edgar Allan Wolfe got credit, but it was lyricist Yip Harburg who pulled it all together just before filming. The final version was locked in on October 8, 1938. MGM put more money into The Wizard of Oz than any movie they had ever made. The final budget reached $2.7 million, which would be more than $60 million today. They used brand new special effects, famous directors, and original songs. It was a huge risk. The filming was long and full of problems. Staff were fired. Scenes were res hot. Scripts kept changing. MGM was scared the film would fail. They knew it had to be perfect. Casting Dorothy was another challenge. Shirley Temple was the first choice. She was America's sweetheart, but her singing wasn't strong enough. Deanna Durbin, a talented singer, was next, but her studio wouldn't let her go. Judy Garland, only 16 and already under MGM contract, got the part, but she didn't look like a child anymore. To fix that, they gave her a tight corset to flatten her chest. She also wore heavy makeup to look younger. Garland later said the corset made it hard to breathe. Even worse, early makeup tests tried to make her look like a doll with blonde hair and strange colors. She called it her Frankenstein look. Thankfully, those ideas were dropped. Ray Bulier was first cast as the Tin Man, but he had always dreamed of playing the Scarecrow. His body moved like rubber from his vaudeville days. He begged the producers to switch. Buddy Epson, who had been cast as the Scarecrow, agreed. But when Epson started work as the Tin Man, disaster struck. The aluminum powder in his makeup poisoned him, his lungs collapsed, and he had to be hospitalized for weeks. Jack Haley was brought in to take his place. Bulier got his dream role and Epson lost his chance because of the makeup. Even the Wicked Witch went through major changes. First, MGM wanted her to be beautiful. Gail Sundergaard was cast, and costume tests show her in sleek dresses with a mysterious look. But test audiences thought a pretty witch wouldn't be scary. MGM changed course and made the witch ugly. Surgard quit. Margaret Hamilton, a former teacher with a sharp face and serious acting skills, took over. She agreed to wear green face paint and scary prosthetics. During one stunt, a fire effect went wrong and she was badly burned. Still, she returned to finish her scenes. Her performance became unforgettable. The Munchkin scenes were some of the most complicated in the whole film. Over 120 little people were hired, most from circus or stage backgrounds. Some didn't speak English. They worked long days in hot costumes. Pay ranged from $50 to $100 a week, less than the dog Toto, who made $125. Rumors of wild parties spread for years, but most of them were just tired and missing home. Some reported poor treatment and bad housing. Many weren't even credited in the film, but their musical numbers made history. In 2007, decades later, a group of surviving Munchkin actors were given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Before the world ever heard Judy Garland sing about a place over the rainbow, The Wizard of Oz quietly played in small towns far from the spotlight. On August 11, 1939, people in Kenosha, Wisconsin and Dennis, Massachusetts watched the very first version of the film. A day later, it screened in a small theater in Oconum with just a few hundred seats. These were test runs. MGM needed honest feedback from regular people before the final cut, and it worked. Viewers helped shape what would become a classic by showing what worked and what didn't. About 20 minutes of footage was cut. After those previews, for the people in those towns, it became a lifelong memory. They got to say they saw Oz before anyone in Hollywood did. Then came the big premiere. On August 15, 1939, the film finally opened at Grauman's Chinese Theater. MGM made it an event. There were spotlights, red carpets, and bleachers packed with fans. 10 days later, it launched across the country. It was the most expensive movie MGM had ever made, costing about $277,000. But even with packed theaters, the movie barely made $3 million in its first run. When they factored in the money spent on promotion, it was clear the studio hadn't really made a profit. MGM called it a disappointment.